It's time for another Two Women Talking. I'm Liana Kersner, Tomboy.
I am Song W. Erickson, Girly Girl.
And this is Two Women Talking, and I have completed the entirety of the books that are out now in the A Court of Thorn and Roses series, Song W. Erickson. I feel accomplished, and we're going to attempt a one-shot here on Two Women Talking, guys. We're going to just try to do a half hour on a single subject, see how that goes. So we're going to talk about self-esteem, because I feel a sense of accomplishment, but that isn't the same as self-esteem.
No.
And there were times that these books really challenged my self-esteem, Song. They really, really did. And I had to dig deep to continue. And so let's start. What is self-esteem to you?
You know what? I'm not even sure how I would define it.
Yeah, because to me, there's self-concept, right? And you got to have that before self-esteem even happens.
Yes.
And then there's self-compassion, right?
That's a hard one.
Yeah, that's a hard one. And I actually think that's a precursor to self-esteem. And this is where you get the loop-de-loop blender of self-image, right? Because there's this concept of yourself. And once you have that, there's things you like about yourself and there's things you don't like yourself. And the self-esteem is for the stuff you like about yourself. The self-compassion is for the stuff you don't like about yourself.
But in order to get to the point where you can have self-esteem, your self-compassion needs to be strong enough to have grace with your failings.
Right. When you're, you can't define yourself by what's good if you kick the crap out of yourself for what's not great about you. And I got to the point where I don't even like talking about faults or good or bad. I think every characteristic, and yes, this is drawing on Jung, the idea of the shadow of every characteristic. And I truly believe that at this point. I mean, there's certain things where people just do lousy things. And quite frankly, a good life is more good things than bad things. A terrible life is, well, you did a bunch of shitty stuff and never course corrected. And that is all a question of, okay, you've got this characteristic. It just is. How do you do good with it instead of doing bad with it? I don't know if that distinction makes sense. It's really esoteric and philosophical, but that is me. I do blah blah thoughts.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a matter of these are your strengths. These are who you are. What you do with it matters more than anything.
Yeah.
I actually think you did a better job putting it than I did.
Because it's, I mean, I'm more detail oriented. And for some people that doesn't work, right? You have to do the TLDR. You have to keep it fairly simple. But self-esteem is not a simple thing.
No.
And one of the things that drives me crazy about the whole self-esteem thing, and A Court of Thorn and Roses really got me thinking about it, is those girls are messes.
Yes.
Right? And I do think how we react to the different characters is very useful in sort of examining ourselves. And I mean, Nesta's the obvious, the Feyre's sister, she's the oldest, right, in the books?
Yes.
She's sort of an example of an examination of terrible self-esteem that doesn't really come to any, I won't say satisfying conclusions, because there are certain things, but we don't have women, the existence of femininity and self-esteem lined up like 3 mountains or 3 stars. And so it's very hard to write a book about it with a conclusive journey. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I've been chewing on lately. Because Nesta's probably one of the most polarizing characters in the whole book.
In the whole series.
Yeah, in the whole series. Yeah. In her book, in the book based on her. Because she both makes people feel terrible about themselves. Or she just picks the scabs. But she is the poster girl for self-loathing.
Well, it's interesting because there is a large group of fans online who say that the only reason people don't like Nesta is because of internalized misogyny.
That's interesting.
And it pisses me off because I don't like Nesta.
Well, you're not supposed
And
to like Nesta.
I think you are,
Really?
because from what I've heard Sarah J. Maas say about the character, I not so much, I haven't seen her say it's her favorite book, just that it was kind of like the most of herself in the
Yes.
book.
Yeah, she says that in the acknowledgments, herself and her husband, which, oh my, we won't go there.
Yeah. So I, and also I don't know that Moss is a complex enough writer to write a main character that you're not supposed to like. I really think you are supposed to like her and relate to her.
That's interesting because up until A Court of Silver Flames, yeah, the one that breaks the naming convention, I
Mm-hmm.
really do think that she's a foil for
Mm-hmm.
Feyre. Feyre hates her, so you're supposed to hate her. That was how I was presented with it.
Well, yeah, but then you get to Silver Flames and it's her story. So you're supposed to see her side. And I mean, everyone else got a personality transplant. Now that the
Okay.
perspective has changed, you're supposed to see it from her point of view.
And that's what I wonder if everybody got a personality transplant because it's from her point of view. Because I mean, Rysand hates her.
I mean, I think yes, but at the same time, I don't know if I trust Moss to have done that on purpose.
It's hard to tell, right? Because there's a case for and against, but the self-esteem angle in that book, I struggle with it because on the one hand, what I would have liked to see is sort of a buildup. And they do have those moments where she just crashes and hates herself all over again. And that's very real. But again, the awareness of the fact that everything's not totally undone. She's just having a bad moment.
Oh,
Also, the way she's treated in the book is about the worst way to help somebody build self-esteem I can think of.
so I'm going to bring up, you talked about the foil to every
Right,
personality trait.
right, right.
And I think it's the fairly obvious foil to self-esteem would be ego, to and by that I mean the classic sense of ego, in that you're not narcissistic, full of yourself.
Okay, so the
And
colloquial ego,
the
not
colloquial
the
ego, yeah, not the,
constructed sense of self. Okay, okay.
yes, no, Gaston from Beauty and the Beast,
Right.
that kind of ego. And I remember hearing Bono from U2 once talk about how whenever he felt insecure and whenever he was afraid something would go wrong, that's when he would act his most arrogant. There's the word arrogance.
Right.
That's when it would really come out. And he knew people hated it, but like he told a story about like when they did the Super Bowl, and he could feel people touching him as he was walking towards the stage, and he could feel it starting to mess with the line on his microphone,
Uh-oh.
or specifically his headset, and he could feel that it was coming loose every time people touched it and touched his back. And so he said he just started swaggering because he didn't know what else to do. He couldn't stop and fix it because it's the Super Bowl halftime. So he's like, just walk like you know what you're doing. And that, and then of course there was criticism like, oh, he's there doing a 9/11 memorial and he's got this huge ego and he's acting all arrogant. And he's like, no, that was just my way of coping, which is something I relate to. But I think that's part of why ego and arrogance can be the counterfoil and kind of the negative side of self-esteem, because self-esteem comes from a self-assuredness and self-actualization of embracing your own. I know you said you don't want to use flaws, but embracing your own weaknesses and your strengths and finding the balance between them.
I think you're allowed to say something's a flaw about you. I just don't necessarily know I have the right to say it about anybody else but me. You know what I mean?
I can see that.
Like if you think something's a flaw about you, that's valid. if there's something in you that you actually like, I'm not going to
Mhm.
tell you you're wrong.
I, I'm judgy, so like I'm not afraid. Like in writing recently, there's been this in the reading community. There's been this discussion over, well, there's no such thing as bad writing because if someone likes it, that means it's good. And I just want to pull up my immortal and go, what is good about this?
See, see, that's not a character trait. So I
Well, no,
really
but
agree with you there, right?
no, that's just something that's been on my mind, and so I've been
Yeah.
thinking a lot about like subjective versus objective flaws.
Fair. And I mean, to go back to the whole thing about arrogance, right? There's a
Yes,
shining example of men are allowed a lot more arrogance than women are.
but at the same time, I think the actual root of a lot of arrogance comes from insecurity.
Oh, sure. Which is why I don't understand why it's always considered this attractive quality in men.
Which I mean, I think that comes back to men behave that way because they think that's how they're supposed to behave. So when they see someone doing it who seems like he's not faking it, it actually seems legit, they're like, oh, he's got it going on, which might not be the case at all.
And
But
that's the
it
thing. Somebody who's really confident isn't arrogant.
no,
Yeah.
and that's the key point. And we've lost that distinction. Because I mean, nowadays, what is nuance? I mean, so
Yeah.
few people can look at anything with nuance. And so they don't see the difference between arrogance and self-assuredness or self-esteem. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so a lot of it's that lobsters in a pot thing, right? Where so
Right.
often when someone seems confident and they have self-esteem, you get the little people who don't have self-esteem who try to just bring them down saying, oh well, this person is egotistical. Like,
Oh, I've heard
okay,
it about myself. I know exactly what you're talking about.
well, like admittedly, like the first thing that comes to mind, and this isn't even self-esteem, but just like the whole thing with Mr. Beast,
Oh yeah.
the YouTuber who like he keeps doing all these charitable things, like he just got 34 million pounds of garbage out of the ocean.
Yeah.
But so it's like I've never actually heard anything bad about him except for people saying, "Oh, he, you know, he did this or he's ruining YouTube somehow." Now, I will
Yeah.
say there was just we are recording this a bit in advance, so there was just allegations against someone he works with, and so there's debate of whether or not
That
he
yeah, I looked into that and it they seem I'm not convinced yet.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say allegedly there may be something. So
It,
if
there's if it's the one I'm thinking of, there's allegations of inappropriate behavior with a minor, but the person who's a minor at the time said, we were just joking around. I never thought it was serious. I never
yeah,
felt pressure to do anything.
and
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 I
also,
believe them right now.
so is it Mr. Beast being accused or just someone he works with?
Someone he works with.
Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, it just if it turns out that Mr. in the next few weeks that Mr. Beast actually has done something heinous or awful,
Yeah.
I don't know that at the time, but right now from what I've seen, it just seems like people throwing a fit that someone is successful and is actually doing something.
Yeah, it was
Because that
Dr. Disrespect that there were shenanigans claimed.
yes.
Oh my God, keeping track of this stuff is a full-time job.
Oh god, it
And well, I mean, let's face it, DramaTube is giving the rest of YouTube a bad name because it's a collection of personality disorders. And there are a lot of just awful people that people somehow find entertaining until something terrible happens and it finds out they're an absolute disaster.
see just below DramaTube there is something called the commentary community.
Right.
and the art commentary community, which is specifically people giving their opinions while drawing, or sometimes if they don't feel like it, you get game footage.
Right.
But the interesting thing in the last few months, it has exploded with everyone turning on each other, in part because
They can dish it out, but they can't take it.
okay, there's that, but there's also several people were exposed as behaving very badly. And
Okay.
but the people who were exposed were also former victims. So it's like
Mm.
this person, there was a drama when someone accused them of something, and they it led to a kind of civil war in the commentary community over did this person do this or not. A couple years later, it comes out that whether this one person was right or not, the so-called victim has been behaving like that behind the scenes. And the thing I've noticed from listening to these hours long Discord calls that they post of calling each other
Oh,
out and everything is it is people who have been hurt. Like
yes.
it's people who have been groomed
Yeah.
facing people who either groomed someone else
Yeah.
or who they think enabled a groomer, and
Hmm.
they're not being practical about it. They're clearly taking out their own trauma.
Hmm.
It's like you're not yelling at this person because it's actually going to do something.
Yeah.
You are yelling at this person because you haven't dealt with your own trauma, which is why you shouldn't be involved in what you call predator hunting. And it's some of it is young people who,
Yeah.
you know, were groomed online. There was one guy in particular, he was known for being really angry and really loud and really mean.
Hmm.
And he finally came out in the last couple months and was like, yeah, so my old man sexually and physically abused me as a kid,
Hmm.
and I never addressed that. And that's why when people are just like, oh, he's a terrible person, you know, he used slurs, I'm like, okay, one, this is a 40-year-old guy from Texas who's also
Okay.
Hispanic. So it's like, if he, and it wasn't even super bad slurs. It's like, it was the R word, which bad slur, but like not,
That one's taken a while to.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like, there are things to call out, but to still be getting on this guy 2 years after he used the R word in a call or a couple calls, and he's since
Wait,
said he wants to change.
he stopped using it and they're
Yeah.
still on it. Okay, that
Yeah.
to me is a sign that the people still on him for something 2 years ago, they have no self-esteem and they're crabs in a bucket trying to pull him down to their level.
Yes. And like, I know it's hard to explain drama with with multiple moving pieces, and like he has other issues. Like
Right.
I've followed this guy for a while because sometimes I just need 4 hour Discord calls to listen to
Oh,
drama while
see,
I draw.
I can't do that. I really feel um like it is a huge violation of privacy every time I have to go through them for some sort of like, professional opinion kind of thing. Journalistically, it
Yeah.
always just feels like I am eavesdropping, even when I've gotten permission from the people that gave it to me. I am very aware that these things were not written for public consumption. Everyone speaks differently when they don't think the world is going to see it.
Yeah. And so again, it's there is just the way these people don't handle their own trauma, and so they're trying to
Oh, yeah.
be,
They're deflecting and projecting.
yeah,
It's all, yeah.
they're trying to do good. Like, I'll give them that. They are well intentioned, but they are doing it very badly. And the problem is, too often that's a sign of you have trauma you yourself have not dealt with, or you cannot deal with your own self-loathing, so you have to take it out on other people.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you are going to achieve any kind of self-esteem, you need to address your own self-loathing. That is something that's very important. And it's also something a lot of guys from nerd spaces who are still kind of hung up on this, oh, well, girls don't like this thing because I was made fun of as a kid.
Mhm.
And the wound is still there. And it's like you probably should not be looking for a woman to be in a relationship with if you
When you think
haven't.
all women are the same.
Yes,
Yeah.
and if you haven't addressed it. Like there are women who talk about we've always been here. And so,
Yeah. Okay. Keep
like
going. I got something to add to that.
well, I mean, you look at it's like there's some women who adapted to it. You know, we were better with being around guys. We had an easier time being one of the guys. So we didn't get it quite as hard. Like we still had issues. Like I know you and I both have stories of times where guys were like, yeah, whatever, fake geek girl. But some girls didn't handle that as well. They weren't able to adapt to kind of the boys club to it. And I feel like there's wounds on both sides.
Well, I
And like,
mean, let's face it, the nerd checking meant
mm-hmm,
that it stopped being something women were allowed to enjoy and started being something that we knew there'd be a test tomorrow, so we constantly
mm-hmm.
had to study. And how the hell can you enjoy anything when you think you're going to be quizzed on it? Nobody has perfect knowledge of these gigantic intellectual properties with,
And I mean, it at its basis, nerd checking is something that's always happened. It,
yeah, there's degrees, right?
yeah, and but I do think as these properties have evolved and changed, and as it has tried to cater to a more female audience, and some of those changes have not been good. You know, I've talked about how I don't particularly like the changes to Star Wars. It hasn't worked for me. I've now left the fandom because it's just not for me anymore. And but as some of these changes have happened, some of which I feel have lowered the quality of the product, people have become more defensive, and so nerd checking has become more defensive. And it's one of those things where it's not a bad thing, but it can be corrupted.
Well, that's where you get into the whole anti-ship thing, and that's we don't have time for that. So let's do a bit of because I think we've sort of gone into the realm of the juxtaposition for kind of nerds of self-esteem, but then awareness. Like, how do we have self-esteem in a world that thinks we're low status, quote unquote?
Part of it is you cannot build your identity on these properties.
Yeah.
And this is something I've talked about, and this is why so many people have gotten so upset about stuff like Star Wars and Marvel changing and the MCU shifting, is because they're like, well, it's not for me anymore. And it's like, okay, you I get that. I get why that hurts, but you also need to be self-actualized in yourself enough that that doesn't completely destroy you.
And okay, let me frame this in a different way. The
Mm-hmm,
original Captain America movie is
mm-hmm,
for me. I don't care what anybody says. Steve McQueen homages, yes, love it.
mm-hmm,
That movie will always be for me,
mm-hmm.
even if oh god, I don't even remember. Was it Echo, the last Marvel thing? I don't even remember the last Marvel thing.
I think so.
I mean, I uh well, by the time this airs, Deadpool and Wolverine are gonna be out. Probably gonna be my thing, right?
Oh yeah.
So I have tickets for that, and we're recording it. I have never bought tickets so far in advance for any movie ever. And so you can go Captain America, my thing. First Doctor Strange movie, very much not my thing. The entire massive IP cannot be for you that indicates you are putting way too much of yourself reliant on factors beyond your control.
Look at the fact that my favorite MCU movie is the first Thor.
Love that movie.
And then I enjoy the second one. And third one, fucking hate it.
That was I've lost track. That was Ragnarok, right?
Ragnarok, yeah.
Ragnarok. It was two movies. So I
Yeah.
get confused at the numbering.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know what? And that's totally valid. It's like I said on Twitter a few times that I found Andor about as, boring as dry toast. If
And
somebody loved it, and I'm saying I found it, not that it objectively is, right? I was
yes.
bored to tears by large portions of the first two seasons of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So, but if other people loved it, that's cool. Things like pacing are subjective.
Mhm.
And it's okay to say you don't like it. Just have the grit, have because sense of self allows you to go, other people are not me. And we're going
Yes.
to like different things and see different things in it. I admit that I am enjoying the whole romantasy genre in terms of the conversations I have with people more than
Mhm.
I have enjoyed a fandom discussion in ages, because two women can disagree horrendously on a Court of Thorn and Roses characters, and then the conversation just sort of veers and
We
everything's cool.
we find ways to laugh about it.
Well, because I think we are all aware that this is very guilty pleasure fiction,
Yes.
and we don't need it to be anything but that. Women are so used to our stuff being dismissed as crap.
Okay. I want to put a caveat on that.
Yeah.
So like in the Discord when we're talking with you, me and Eileen and
Right.
stuff,
Right.
we can do that. There are people who take these books very
Oh,
seriously.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And if you dare to suggest that there is anything objectively better, which I'm sorry, there is better writing than A Court of Thorns and Roses. That's not subjective. That there is stuff that is objectively better.
See, I will say there are things that are objectively better edited. That's the thing that drives me crazy as an
Yes.
editor. I've said this before, like, oh God, because I feel bad. Like the editors just let her hang various body parts out. And that might have been the strategy. Like she may be totally okay with that. And I think that's super brave and very good business. But there's I am not surprised that she had a mental health crisis while she was writing book 5.
And I mean, the question with book 5 is which came first,
Well,
the mental health crisis or the book?
clearly the crisis. There are losing father issues in that book. We know sort of when her father, Sarah J. Maas's father, had the health scare, right?
Mhm.
Like she's clearly working through some of that in that book.
Yes.
But even without that, we don't quite have a formula for dealing with the brutality of public opinion, and everybody does need top ups to that, and it's really hard when you're the big name of the whole thing to go, hey guys, I'm really struggling, because some people are going to talk shit about you behind your back, like, oh,
Yeah.
what does she have to feel bad about? It's like, all right, she's had tons of success. I've seen some of the really scathing takedowns of those books. And even I went like, whoa, this is assuming a lot about her intentions that we can't know for sure. That's unfair.
Yeah.
There's a difference in dealing with the technical elements. And she clearly by the third book was attempting to respond to criticism, right? She's trying. She's clearly taken some of the criticism to heart and attempted to adapt.
Unfortunately, it's done in such a way that she would have been better off just sticking to what she'd already written.
Well, yeah, because it seems like it seems a bit like wounded instead of going, all right, yeah, fair point. I can do that. Right? It's
Yeah.
not coming from a confident place. It feels very defensive and almost fine here, which you know what? I totally understand as someone who has to resist that urge myself all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes keeping your mouth shut is the absolute hardest thing you can do.
But sometimes it is what you have to do.
It is, but you know what? If you slip up, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We all make mistakes. And I do think that one of the best things that people can do for their self esteem is to be around people who actually seem, more interested in building you up and helping you develop your strengths than
Mm-hmm.
criticizing you. Sometimes you do have to say, it's not working for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall, it's much healthier to not be surrounded by yes men, to be surrounded by people who can absolutely tell you no matter what you're good at and why they cherish you being in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're solid that way when somebody goes, okay, this isn't working for me and here's why, it's way easier to take
Yes.
because you know that person has your back and they're saying that to let you know before it goes out in public. That's the time to say that.
Yes.
After that, if somebody asks, answer. Otherwise, just talk about what you liked.
Especially in a time when so many people are so quick to not talk to the person, but just take it public.
Yep.
Like, oh, here's screenshots of the conversation I had with this person. And, sometimes people totally show their ass when they do that. And Twitter will pounce on them and go, yeah, no, you were in the wrong for
Yeah.
doing that. But oftentimes it does turn into a drama. And it's like, some things, yes, you have to take public, especially if it's like an artist who's behaving badly or a YouTuber,
Oh, yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is important to get it out there. But a lot of times you need to have a conversation with the person first instead of going out and trying to get the entire internet on your side and stirring up a hate mob.
Right. And I also think that there's a big difference between something that somebody did 2 years ago, like that thing we talked about earlier of,
Mm-hmm.
okay, he said something not exactly modern sensibilities 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
As far as we know, he stopped. Okay, let it go, folks.
Yeah.
Like he's changed. It wasn't that huge a transgression. I had two people on Twitter in the last week throw that at me.
Mm-hmm.
So, you gotta it tells me a lot about the people who don't let those things go, how they talk to themselves,
Yes.
right? Because if somebody has no forgiveness of other people, it's the Nesta thing, right? She's awful to other people because her self talk about herself is awful.
Mm.
And I think that's when people say, and I say this as somebody who actually liked that character from book three, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's like, okay, this was not a surprise to me having family members that are like that.
Yeah.
And it's really all a question again of the characters that make you feel better about yourself and characters that make you feel worse about yourself. And the thing I find um fascinating about writing aimed at women is they do treat subjective point of view as fact in these books so much.
And I think that's part of the problem of having such a closed perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why I like having large casts and multiple POVs, is because you get to see more perspectives.
Oh, I much prefer that. I really struggled with the first person.
Yes.
I
And
much preferred it when the books jump to multiple POV.
yes. And it's really important to, because I mean, a lot of people struggle, and this isn't new to the internet. The internet has just kind of made it worse, of not being able to see someone else's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, we all try to create these echo chambers, and the moment someone has a differing opinion, people freak out, and it's like, oh, you're a bad person then, because it comes down to this: if I think I'm good, then everything I think must be good. So if anyone doesn't agree with me, they must be bad.
Yeah, and that's fallacious reasoning, and it shows a real lack of self-esteem and self-compassion
Yes.
because separating did a bad thing and am a bad person,
Yeah, because
really important.
yeah, and it comes back to that, it without self-compassion you can't have self-esteem, but you need that self-compassion, because otherwise, especially nowadays when there is this puritanical
Yeah.
thing, and not even, a lot of times when people refer to puritanical, they're talking about sexuality,
Mhm.
but like, not even that. It's, you have to behave this way, you have to toe the party line,
Yeah.
you cannot step out, you cannot misbehave. And so many people have internalized that, and it's like that Tumblr mentality that's bled over into Twitter and stuff, of you have to behave, and if
Right.
you step out, you're the villain. It's like, and this kind of bleeds into cancel culture, because like, I look
We'll
at,
talk about that another episode, right?
yeah.
Because now we're in brat summer and we're allowed to not be perfect. Have you heard about this brat summer?
Yes, I have. I'm
Yeah.
curious to see how that song goes on the charts now.
Yeah, brat summer. We're allowed to be messy. We're allowed to like to party. Kamala is brat. Um, yeah, we'll see how it goes. But this has been our experiment
Yes.
in a two women talking, kind of one shot, single subject. We'll see what you guys think. Let us know whether you prefer the longer form or you prefer this sort of um more contained package. I am Liana Kersner, Tomboy.
I am Song W. Erickson, Girly Girl.
And check out Calidus Chronicles Volume 1 and Volume 2, both available on Amazon. I highly recommend them. I thoroughly enjoyed them, especially Volume 2.
Thank you.